All right, 10 seconds.
Hola, buenos días. Welcome to MendoLatino. I am Diana Coriat.
Hola a todos, mi nombre es Loreto Rojas, bienvenidos a MendoLatino.
We are co-hosts of MendoLatino, where we discuss local, national, and international issues, mostly in Español. And today you're going to be listening to a mostly English and bilingual edition of our show.
Y nosotros, bueno, hoy es un programa que quizás tenga más inglés, pero igual vamos a hablar un poquito español. Y les recordamos que we are on the air on the second and the fourth Monday of every month at 9 o'clock here in our beloved radio estación comunitaria del condado de Mendocino, KZYX. También estamos los domingos por la tarde en KGUA en el área de Mendonoma. Yeah, you can hear also us in Mendonoma area. If you miss any of our radio programs or you want to learn more about MendoLatino, please visit our Facebook page and our YouTube channel called MendoLatino. It's one word altogether, MendoLatino.
Great, that's right. And today we are focusing on a theme that is near and dear to the heart and the mission of MendoLatino, the importance of acknowledging and preserving Latino or we also say Latinx heritage and history as a fundamental part of the history of the United States.
Many of you know that for the past few years, MendoLatino has been conducting oral histories of the Latino community on the Mendocino coast. And we are producing a podcast series called Our North, Nuestro Norte, based on all these oral histories. We will also soon have a window exhibit at local Latino history at the Larry Spring Museum, which is located in the city of Fort Bragg. And we are going to be there from late June through September. And you can find out more information about the projects that Diana Coriada and myself, Loreto Rojas, as MendoLatino are working on. And you can also listen to the episodes that are in our website, which is called also mendolatino.org. And also you can look for Nuestro Norte, Our North in SoundCloud to listen as a podcast.
That's right. And so knowing all that about MendoLatino, you understand why it's our absolute pleasure today to have as our guest Seila Mota Casper. She is a woman who is leading the effort with her organization, Latinos and Heritage Conservation, to make sure that Latino history is recorded and preserved. And today she's going to tell us about the crucial work being done by her organization. So let us introduce her.
Seila, yes, Diana. Seila Mota Casper is a seasoned historical preservationist dedicated to advancing heritage conservation, community empowerment, and preservation equity. As the inaugural executive director of Latinos in Heritage Conservation, LHC, she leads the national effort to preserve Latinx places, stories, and cultural heritage. Previously, she served as a senior field officer at the National Trust for Historic Preservation, safeguarding America's unique historic treasures. Seila holds a Master's of Fine Arts in Historic Preservation from the Savannah College of Art and Design, where her groundbreaking thesis addressed the underrepresentation of Latinx heritage and advocated for a national conservation strategy. She also holds a Bachelor of Arts in Visual Arts from Texas Women's University. Muy bienvenida, Seila, a nuestro programa. Muchas gracias por venir a MendoLatino.
Muchas gracias a ustedes. Es un gran placer estar hoy con ustedes en este día. Y gracias por esta invitación.
Quiero decir una cosa, quería decir para las personas que nos están escuchando en español que Seila es una experimentada conservacionista histórica que se dedica a promover la conservación del patrimonio, el empoderamiento de la comunidad y la equidad en la preservación de estos sitios. Ella es la directora ejecutiva de Latinos Heritage Conservation, que es una organización que tiene un esfuerzo nacional, a nivel nacional, para preservar los lugares, las historias y el patrimonio cultural de los latinos. Y para nosotros es tan importante que ella esté con nosotros, así que estamos muy agradecidos. Y vamos así, salpicar hoy día, vamos a hacer un poquito inglés, un poquito español, un poquito spanglish. Adelante, Diana.
Well, I'm going to kick off a question that we often have in MendoLatino. We always start with you. So it's for us, it's very obvious from your biography that you have been completely passionate about Latino historic preservation for a really long time, even before becoming the executive director of Latinos and Heritage Conservation. So what in your own life experience led you to become passionate about this field? Solo estoy preguntando, ¿qué en su propia vida ha pasado en la trayectoria de su vida para llegar a tener tanta pasión para Latino Heritage, para la preservación de los lugares?
Pues yo soy primer generación aquí en los Estados Unidos, soy tejana y crecí en Dallas, Texas. Y yo creo que siempre ha sido una historiana, ¿no? Crecí en una familia que siempre estábamos dedicando tiempo a decir nuestra historia. Cuando estábamos haciendo tamales, había el chisme por la mesa, que también es historia y historias. Y pues no, crecí en una casa que siempre estábamos aprendiendo de la historia mexicana. Yo soy mexicana, historia de Texas, que por una vez era el país de México. Y dentro de esos años, cuando estaba en elementary school, siempre estaba leyendo libros de historias como de Dr. Martin Luther King. Y pues me encantaba. Y la primera cosa que siempre pienso que me como me dio dirección para dedicarme a este trabajo es cuando comencé a aprender la historia de Texas en la escuela, y la historia que estaba leyendo que me decía mi maestra era pues bien diferente que ni la historia que me decía mi mamá, como por ejemplo la historia de Santa Ana, la historia del Álamo. Eso era algo que la historia era bien diferente de que estaba aprendiendo en la escuela y eso que estaba aprendiendo en casa. Y esa era la primera vez que de veras pensé que quería aprender más.
Ya, qué interesante lo que usted está diciendo, Seila, porque nos encontramos muchísimo con personas que escuchan esta historia oficial y después tienen que ir a otros lugares como a la universidad to do Chicano studies to actually learn the more deep story and understand de las diferencias, ¿no? Entre lo que a veces está en un libro y lo que es real. Entonces, usted creció en lo que le dicen el bordo, ¿no? O sea, you grew in the border, ¿no?
Sí, en la
Y,
frontera.
y usted decía antes que es primera generación, ¿verdad? Latina nacida aquí en los Estados Unidos. Y nos puede contar un poquito cómo era la vida cuando usted nos contó que hacían sus tamales y la escuela y todo eso, pero cómo es crecer en un lugar así que es tan profundamente latino?
Pues es algo tan bonito y algo que todos estamos tan orgullosos de vivir en la frontera. No, pues era algo bien bonito. Mis papás llegaron aquí en los Estados Unidos bien jóvenes, se casaron de 15 y 16 y llegaron con mi hermano, y en ese tiempo él tenía 1 año, y se movieron para Dallas. Y en Dallas había pero muchos latinos, había desde los 1850 había demasiados latinos, mucha gente que vinieron también después de la Revolución de México, que vinieron para acá. Y siempre había mucha latinidad por allí, pero también había mucho crimen en Dallas, y por eso mis papás se movieron para un suburb que se llama Grapevine. En ese tiempo era bien chiquitito este pueblito. Y Eso era más interesante para nosotros porque en ese tiempo en Grapevine solamente había pues como 5 familias latinos. 5, sí, y eran chicanos y de buenas, unos todavía hablaban español y había familia que le ayudaron demasiadamente a mis parientes, ayudarnos a meternos entre la escuela, con doctores y cosas así. So, creciendo en Grapevine era algo bien diferente porque aunque pues sí estaba en el border, no estaba viviendo esta vida, pero también estaba viviendo afuera de mi latinidad, de mi cultura. Y por eso era bien importante para mis parientes que siempre nos daba tiempo para platicarnos de tradiciones, de historias de familia. Y después de tiempo, todos mis primos y mis tíos se movieron y ahora en Grapevine tenemos como quién sabe, como 100 motas que viven allí, allí todos de, de Sabinas Coahuila. Y pues nos movimos allí, pero era algo bien, bien bonito porque también dentro de ese tiempo, cuando estábamos jóvenes, manejábamos 8 horas para ir para México, 2 veces por mes.
Wow.
Yeah, so en ese tiempo también como estaba viviendo en Grapevine, estábamos yéndonos para México para visitar nuestra familia, mi abuelita y mis primos, mis tías, mis tíos, y todavía estaba viviendo entre los dos países.
Qué interesante, como estamos pensando con Loreto, es como muy parecida a la historia de muchas familias en Fort Bragg.
Ujú.
And in here on the coast, many Latinos are here in Fort Bragg.
Y
And
en
also,
Ukiah,
yeah, yeah.
en muchos lugares de de nuestro condado.
And, it used to be easier to go back and forth as well, especially people that live in, as you call it, the borderlands, no? And
Yeah.
so then you made your way to, well, you worked at a very important, I would say, a mainstream historic preservation organization. And now you're the inaugural executive director, which is interesting because I know that Latinos in Heritage Conservation has been around since 2014. And it shows the growth of organizations. They often start very small and keep growing. And I'm really impressed with what you're doing. So we wanted to invite you on to talk about what Latinos in Heritage Conservation is doing right now. And more than anything, why is this work so crucial?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, as you mentioned, we have been around since 2014, so we are in our 11th year. I always say we're in our pre-teens. Right now we're out disturbing the system and shaking things up. So, so we're on our 11th year, and that's right. We went from a very grassroots organization. I've been with the organization since the very beginning as well. Desde, ese tiempo, and it was just so beautiful that we were all working in this space and all felt the same way, that we felt very siloed. No teníamos comunidad, nuestra gente, no teníamos soporte y era algo que era tan importante para tener, especially when you're the only brown person in the room. Typically, and I'm sure as you're saying, those that you all are speaking to through your oral histories, it's very true, and especially for first gens, we get here and you're in this job that you've worked so much for, your parents have worked so much for you to have an education and a career, and then you get to these spaces and you don't have the full support, and you grow up in a very, white system, and so, yes, I was very excited to start my career off with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. It's the largest historic preservation nonprofit in the United States. And there I started, focusing more on what was my research and thesis, as you heard, with, Latinx history, and just really trying to think about, democratizing historic preservation. And we grew, and about 3 years ago, we received funding from the Mellon Foundation, and we were able to hire staff. So I switched over from volunteer board member and applied for the job, got the job, very excited for that. And we started out with a team of 3, and now somos 10, so we grew, crecimos, pero bien rápido.
It sounds that way. Wow. And um, yeah, so why is this work so important right now?
Yeah, I think the work has always been important. I always like to say that, um, we come from a line of storytellers. We've been telling our stories, using our voice and, even from like our indigenous roots, focusing on traditional knowledge or, you know, must, earlier, Loreto, we were talking about starting the day with smelling,
Yes,
and just
yes.
relying on like the natural land, yerbas, just thinking through like all of the traditional ways that we've carried down our culture. Whether it's, tamaladas or, the chisme or the traditional ways that we have told storytelling, abuelita around sitting around and telling us nuestras historias. Um, and so we come from a line of storytellers, and it's the only way that we've been able to keep our stories alive. For so much, during the conquest, our stories were being taken away from us on purpose. Our practices, our indigenous practices were being taken away. Our spiritual practices were being taken away. And, I think our people have always been resilient. We've always been reclaiming this, and we still carry this on with us and have integrated it in this beautiful hybrid that we are today. And so I just want to start out with that, saying that, we honor all of the, nuestras abuelas that have carried these stories from generation to generation. But it is very important because, Latinos, we are the largest ethnic and cultural group in the United States. As I mentioned, this used to be so much of this land used to be, Mexico. And we've been here, our indigenous, cousins have been here, in connection with our indigenous communities and, in central, por el DF, and it's a story and a lineage that's always been connected, but it's a story that again continues to be pushed out and erased. You know, they there's a system in place and a dominant narrative in place that doesn't allow the openness for us to tell these stories. So it becomes more and more important, especially during times like this, where there are actual executive orders to not tell these stories, to silence us again, to say que, nuestra historia no importa, and it does. It does, aquí estamos, and so I think that it is so important even now to tell this. And at Latinos and Heritage Conservation, we believe in what's called community-led historic preservation. I am a practitioner, I am trained, I am a historian. However, my role is to help support the community tell their own story and to give them a platform. It's not a top-down, which I think is a very European colonistic way of thinking of storytelling. And it's not up for me to do research and to tell the story. It's for me to provide space like you all are doing, with your the Norte Oral Histories project that you're doing. It's very similar to that. These histories, because they've never been documented or seen as valuable or worthy, we continue to carry that tradition down of our traditional oral history telling, knowing that it's valid, knowing that it's important, knowing that it's carried us down from, generación after another. And this is how I know my own history. And so it's just very important. It's always been important, but during times right now where we are being asked to silence ourselves, it's even more important to be louder.
Muchas gracias, Seila. Seila, qué interesante. Sí, totalmente se cruza con el trabajo que Diana y yo estamos haciendo. And I want to say thank you so much for your work, because many times we hear phrases like, oh, we're gonna give voice to the Latinos. And I'm like, yeah, we already have a voice. Maybe you just need to sit and listen. right? It's a recurrent topic in my mind, and the work that your organization is doing is just remarkable. We also have here in our area all these stories that you're talking, and we are also trying to create spaces where to share them. So I just wanted to repeat that MendoLatino is going to have a window at the Larry Spring Museum. Is a museum that is in Redwood Avenue and in Fort Bragg between Franklin and Harrison. And we are going to be there for several months, offering to our community what we have recollected in our work, and sharing those stories and visibilizing also, haciendo visible estas personas que hemos estado aquí mucho tiempo. Like you said, I love when when I take the map of North America and I remove the lines, and you can see this continuum of the Mesoamerica going into the United States all the way up into the big plains, como le dice, las grandes planicies, ¿no? Donde reina todavía el bisonte y otros animales. Y ver esta continuidad de la latinidad y de la cultura. Y quiero también agradecerle mucho por reconocer que somos un grupo étnico, somos indígenas de las Américas, y nuestra visión es bastante diferente a la visión de otros grupos, ¿no? Pero voy a dejar que Diana le haga la próxima pregunta.
No, it's emotional. I just want to say we're doing this work. You know, I came to this area, Mendocino County. I live on the coast about 7 or 8 years ago. And I come from New York City, where Latinos are the majority, and people of color are the majority, and there's a very strong organizing culture. And when I came here, the imaginary of the area is very white. You know, it's very like the Portuguese came here to fish, and you know, and I was like, well, where are the Latinos? You know, where I see them visibly, but where is the history? And Loreto and I began to work in radio 5 years ago, MendoLatino, and it became even more part of our conversation with us and our community advisors. And we began to talk to the different community historic preservation organizations to find out what they had on Latinos. And now, just to say, they're all very, very underfunded and do a great job with the 2 pennies that they have, you know. So not to diss them at all, but nobody had anything on Latinos. And part of that is because, you know, how do people get archives? A family comes in, maybe a family that's had money, and they have many albums of their history, and they've been keeping careful track of their history, and they bring their albums in, and that's how the archives get started. And Latino families were not feeling that same kind of empowerment to walk into a historical preservation organization and say, here are my family albums, our history should be counted here. And so that's what our project is doing. So at the Larry Spring Museum, as far as we know, and we may be wrong, this is the first time that there is going to be a window exhibition that looks at Latino history. And we will take photos and we will send them to you so you can put that, you know, on your website. I mean, it's a very important step here. And our oral histories and the podcasts are beautiful. And I think you'd really relate to our second one of our dear Lucrecia Renteria, who is the executive director of Mendocino Coast Clinics, and her whole story, que como la frontera cruzó su familia, because she is also from the Southwest and grew up speaking English mostly, and that tells her whole story. So we have many, many different stories to tell. So back to the great work that you're doing. So you received a $4 million grant from Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Thank you, Andrew W. Mellon, for recognizing how important this work is. And I know you probably had to do a lot to convince them how important this work is. What is this funding going to allow, or what is it allowing you to do? Now, I know that one thing I'd love to bring up is that it's the first ever Latinx preservation granting program. So you've just given out a bunch of grants. I had never seen a grant like this in my life. I was so excited to see it. Give us some examples of the kinds of projects or projects that you're investing in right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thank you. I think the important thing that I always focus back on and just from a baseline, just reiterate what you just said is that this is the very first Latinx Historic Preservation Grant Program in the nation. And it's exciting, but it's also jarring that it's the first. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we are so grateful to, yes, the Andrew Mellon Foundation for the support. We received a grant, and a portion of that grant will allow us to gift out $600,000 over a period of 3 years. So we will be gifting out and had the very first one that rolled out this past year. We just awarded to 14 different projects, a total of $600,000, and it's called Nuestra Herencia. And again, it speaks to everything that we were talking about, just sharing Nuestra Historia and really thinking about how we can shift these systems and empower communities. We know that there are so many studies that go out there that less than 1% of all of the dollars that go out support Latinx, organizations, sin fines de lucros. And we know that funding is not going to the mom and pop places. So I wanted to create a grant program that would support the projects that I saw throughout the United States over my last dozen years. Gente doing great work, abuelas, abuelos, there were elders doing great work, but not being connected, like you were saying, to these traditional forms of historic preservationist. And through my practice, I practice very differently. I practice, I'm just as a member of the community of wanting to support them. And I think that is very just radically different than how others approach. And I also think it speaks to, nuestra cultura and the way that we were raised and respecting our elders and, allowing, storytellers to tell their story, to share, to teach us, and be grateful for it. And so through this grant program, we just awarded $600,000. We're very excited that it's the first one of its kind. And like there in California, there's the Central American Historical Ancestral Society. They're out of LA doing incredible work, really focusing on voices of, Central Americans and trying to tell the dynamic story, very similar to some of the work that you all are doing. But they're developing, and their outcome and what they wanted to develop was they wanted to do research on comunidad so they could put up historical markers or heritage markers where these events occurred, where these major milestones came to. So they're doing research and documentation to start out a community-led marker program in LA. And so that is really exciting to hear. And we're also supporting things like construction projects, adobe projects de iglesias en Colorado y también como like exhibits for museums. We're supporting. I will say most of the projects that came through were for interpretive work. And so we know that there's that need out there. And we actually this year we only had $600,000, but we received almost $3.5 million in requests. Yeah,
Wow.
that speaks to the need that's out there. And all of them were incredible projects, projects that we've never even heard of, projects. We received applications out of Boston, from, a lot of like South and Central Americans, a lot of, Afro-Caribbean, that were coming out. You spoke on New York. We received a lot of New York, but I will say most of the applications that came through were from California. So we invite you to circle back with us again in the fall. It's historic preservation. So the thing about it is that it does support all of this work, but it supports historic preservation, so it's place-based. Y estamos buscando como sitios históricos. Estamos buscando pues un lugar que tiene una historia y queremos decir esa historia en un museo. que pasó allí. So it has to be very place-based. And we're happy to talk to you about it and happy to work with you. We want to support your work. We want you to be successful. The other unique thing about our grant program is that not only do we award grants, but the other thing that I've learned through my research is that, and through my work, is that a lot of Latinx organizations or mom and pop organizations need help to see this through. You know, we're not trained to go and talk to the city to look for a permit or to work with engineers or architects. And so thankfully, you know, I have that skill set. I have a preservation architect. We have that skill set. We're historians, we're educators, we have a great team. And so the other thing that we're doing that's extremely different than any grant program is that we are providing assistance throughout the entire beginning to end of that project. So if they need us to create an RFP to hire an architect, we will do that. If they need us to conduct those interviews and help them scale and rate, we will do that. If they, you know, a lot of times it's reviewing proposals. It's a lot of times it's reviewing a lot of the applicants that came in to support that work. And, you know, we do this work throughout the country. So we work with incredible individuals and usually know who these individuals are. So can provide firsthand recommendations because we want you to succeed. So that's the other exciting thing about it. We're going to open it up. Nuestra herencia will be opened up again in Octubre. And we will award out most likely again about the February, March date. So, you know, I invite everybody just to go to our website, check it out, read up on it, set up a call with us now. I have an amazing grants manager. Her name is Patricia, and she can set up a phone call with you early on just to discuss your ideas. And, you know, if you don't know exactly what you want to do, we're happy to help you brainstorm. You know, how can you tell your story within the realm that you would qualify for this? Or is this a good grant? Maybe it's not, but I have a partner and a friend that works at another organization that would be a better fit for you. So we want to also connect you to folks that are going to help you be successful as well.
Muchas gracias, Seila. And I want to reintroduce you to our audience. You are listening to MendoLatino. And here we are, Diana Coriat and myself, Loreto Rojas, interviewing Seila Mota Casper, who is the inaugural executive director of Latinos in Heritage Conservation. And she's talking about this incredible work that is being done and with the Nuestra Herencia, our inheritance, to uplift the presence, contributions of the Latino and history of Latinos in all of the United States, not only in California. Naturally, you know, I always, being a Californian myself, I always feel that we are in a place where we understand more the importance of lifting each other in terms of have a more una sociedad más justa y una sociedad que nos acoge a todos, ¿no? Es un espacio que nos permite California. Así que muchísimas gracias. Thank you everybody for listening MendoLatino today. And remember that if you miss any part of this program, we are going to share it in our Facebook page and also in our YouTube channel called MendoLatino, one word. So, adelante, Diana.
Well, one thing that I so appreciate, I've worked in nonprofits for many years, and a funder that funds community-led projects, mom and pop, as you call them, or mom and mom, or pop and pop, whatever, organizations has my love and support. One thing that you're doing that I was, you know, I've been looking at the website's beautiful. Again, people just have to Google Latinos in Heritage Conservation and you'll get right to their website. It's a beautiful website. I want to talk about the Abuelas Project, but first I want to say that you have developed, and I downloaded it last night and began to look at it, a Latinx preservation toolkit tailored for the borderland region. This is extraordinary because, as Seila was saying, we're not necessarily taught how that, even number one, that the history is important, and number two, how to begin the process of preservation. And I just want to quote, I loved, Seila, your introduction letter. And I just want to quote something because I knew you wouldn't do this, but I want to say, you wrote, in this introduction letter to the toolkit, for too long, Latinx history and heritage have been marginalized and omitted, leaving neighborhoods vulnerable to disinvestment, displacement, and erasure. Our mission goes beyond architectural preservation. We aim to empower community leaders and foster vibrant, livable, historic neighborhoods and barrios. That is so beautiful. So tell us a little bit about that toolkit, what people can learn there.
So here's the toolkit. Oh, and I've got, okay, plus you can see it online. It's very beautiful. And we wanted to create a toolkit. I wanted to create something que era por comunidad, para comunidad. And something that wasn't like a 101 booklet. There's so many different types of things that you can have with Latinos. Here's the toolkit right here. And we wanted it to be very visual and something that was told stories through images and through photos and that showed our vibrancy, porque también, somos gente de mucha emoción, ¿no? Y tradiciones y,
Y color.
Y
color,
arte,
y color,
sí.
ya, y color.
Sí, y arte. Pueden ver, Seila nos está mostrando en el video, ¿no? Este es un librito en realidad precioso.
Sí,
Pueden buscarlo, por favor. Vamos a agregar también el sitio web de su organización para que la gente pueda acceder, Seila, ¿sí? Pero si
gracias.
ustedes buscan en internet, como dijo Diana, if you just search on internet Latinos in Heritage Conservation, you will find this resource. So go ahead, Seila.
Gracias. And within the toolkit, we talk about oral histories is historic preservation. And we really believe in that. And we carry that down from our indigenous roots. Oral traditions are a beautiful way of us keeping our heritage alive and has been the way that we've learned from one another to keep our heritage alive. So the toolkit celebrates that. It celebrates Latinidad, danza y música, recetas, y solamente no sitios históricos como estábamos platicando. También nos enfocamos en cosas como comida y teniendo tiempo con familia. Esas son cosas de preservación. Y so in a toolkit, we talk and touch on all of that, but then we also talk on the more formal nuances of historic preservation. So probably mostly what people are used to when we talk about historic preservation is things like, is it a historic district? What does that mean? What can I or can't I do to my building if I do become designated? What does that mean? So we really share how comunidad and how Latinidad is a very different form of historic preservation. And so with the Borderlands Toolkit, we're very excited. We're going to be showcasing a lot of work that is going on in the Borderlands. And we just launched in May, which was Historic Preservation Month. We went to, fuimos para Phoenix, Las Cruces, El Paso, Nogales, pues en todo por el Southwest fuimos, por la frontera. Y, estábamos documentando different oral histories and meeting with, just comunidad throughout and with elders and learning about their barrios and exactly that. In historic preservation, one of the things that most worries me and leads our work is displacement and gentrification, something that you all are dealing with at a rapid rate in California, affordable housing. How can we keep gente in place? How can we keep community in place? And as a historic preservationist, I know that historic preservation can be a tool to help protect barrios against development and demolition. So a lot of the work that we do is through education, and the toolkit was one of my big dreams. It's free. Please download it. Go to our website. Check it out. The Borderlands will be out next year, where we're going to focus things on como cementerios y también cosas that are significant to the Borderlands, specifically mujeres. acequias. So esos son diferentes topics that we're going to be featuring that are specific to the borderlands and that speak to our roots and us being here for eons of years, but the ways that we're carrying down, nuestra cultura from one generación to the other, and being able to show through these case studies that communities already doing this work. So in this work, we don't highlight LHC, our work that we're doing. We highlight beautiful gente that are doing this work. This is a group out of this is Pike Park out of Dallas, and this community, Little Mexico, 1920s Mexican Revolution community was totally displaced and erased due to urban planning. It's a story of every large city with the highway systems coming down and redlining. But this community is still actively working today to make sure that that story is not forgotten. And so we showcase beautiful people, elders doing this work, and highlight their work to help inspire through others, because that's how we learn from one another. And that's traditionally and culturally how we've learned from one another.
I have to tell you that one of the most impactful experiences I ever had, and I know you know this organization, I know you partner with them, Esperanza Center of Peace and Justice, and Graciela Sanchez, who I see is still doing the work. I met her maybe 20 years ago. I don't remember. I was maybe the early 2000s. I was invited to her organization in San Antonio. It's in San Antonio, see?
Mhm.
And because it's 20 years ago, I'm trying to remember. But it was so impactful because, well, the organization's so beautiful, has such great people. And they took us on a bus tour. And it was amazing because it was, I don't remember her name. You probably know who she is. The first Latina, I believe she was like the mayor of San Antonio. She had or a city council woman. She had a very important position. And then she was no longer in that position, but she started this bus tour of Latino neighborhoods. And she wanted to kind of reconfigure how people saw a neighborhood. And she'd say, like, look at this neighborhood and how beautiful these murals are and what's being preserved and the tiendita and just the way she would look, have people look at the Latino neighborhoods. And then she brought us to areas that were being completely gentrified and what was happening there. It was like a whole different way to look at history and the history of Texas. And she talked about Los Alamos and how that history had been changed. So that, impacted me very early on in terms of how do you describe a geography. So that must have been incredible to go through that tour and just see all these vital places. You also have a project called the Abuelas Project. And I think that's been going on for a while, but that is the first thing that caught our attention. Tell us a little bit about the Abuelas Project and where that's headed.
Yeah. So the Abuelas Project, we started this about 6, 7 years ago. And it speaks to exactly what you were saying, Diana, that we're not in the archivos. Our stories aren't in the archives. They're not being documented. And as a historic preservationist, I know that our sites aren't being documented or designated or protected. So we just did a refresh of my thesis work study, and we conducted an equity study where I wanted to see what was the difference from the research that I had done, 10, 12 years ago to now, for sites listed in the National Register of Historic Places. And the National Register is the federal historic designation program that preserves sites that are worthy of historic preservation and that tell the national story. So the National Park Service, they are the stewards and the storytellers of America. And of that, what we found that of all of the sites listed, which there are nearly 100,000 sites that are listed in the National Register, that only 0.65% of sites are associated with Latinx history and heritage. So under 1% of
Wait, can you repeat that? That deserves repeating. Say that again.
Yeah, so under 1% of sites listed in the National Register of Historic Places are associated with Latinx history. And that does not reflect the full story of America's history. It doesn't tell all of the wonderful contributions and accomplishments that we've given to this país. Recent history to even older history, So through this research, we realized that in the National Register, that wasn't there. So we said, okay, let's create our own registry. Let's create a people's registry. So we decided to create the program, which, you've heard me talk about nuestra abuelas. Like, we honor nuestra abuelas. They are the storytellers, the culture keepers, um, the culture bearers of, nuestra comunidad. And so we pay homage to abuelas in this. And essentially what it is it's an online digital platform that you can come in si tienes una historia, una receta, hay un sitio histórico que te importa, si hay algo que pasó en un sitio, pero el edificio ya no está allí. We want to learn about it. We want to document it in here. Again, if it's, your abuela's recipe for something, an oral history, un canción, corrido, we want to hear about it because these are ways that we are recognizing and documenting our own history and heritage. So the Abuelas Project is created so we have a platform to storytell. So a lot of the oral histories, like El Norte that you all are doing there at the Larry Spring Museum, those are the types of stories that we want to crowdsource in here. We're creating a national database that's going to go throughout the country. So right now, we did a pilot in Texas. Now we're doing Borderlands, and we will be documenting these stories and inviting people to come in and storytell around it and upload it on there. So that way then we create a national registry for historians, historic preservationists, students to come and do further research and to learn and hear what is most important to comunidad. So again, it's another way that we can amplify and support community-led historic preservation and support our community to do this work in a tradition that traditionally pushes us out, does marginalize us. So the Abuelas Project will be national, and it'll be a way that we can validate and hear other stories, but also learn from it and then begin to do formal historic preservation around it.
Wow, that's amazing.
Sí, muchas gracias, Seila. Oiga, it really touches me too that the work is done from below, as you're saying. It's like you are taking yourself to these road trips and meeting with the communities and listening and helping them to organize. And but I don't know if the word is to help them to organize, because we easily can organize ourselves, but to just have this platform and this listening important individuals like you are to tell our stories and share them. So that's really incredible. Thank you for doing that. We try to do the same kind of work. So I feel that this is a conversation that really resonates with us here in Mendocino County. And I want to remind you, you're listening to MendoLatino. We are in our last 10-15 minutes of the program. So you are listening to Seila Mota Casper. She is the director of Latinos Heritage Conservation. Perdón, lo dije mal, ¿no? Latinos in Heritage Conservation. Oh, I said it right. Sorry. Yeah.
That's right. And I wanted to mention also that we know Cajas. They've been on our the Central American Historical
Society,
Registry. Yeah, and we've had them on our radio show, I think at least 2 times. And we're like sisters in that work and just love the work that they're doing and excited to see what they're going to be able to do with the grant. So I wanted to ask you a question because we're in Northern California, and I think in the Southwest, let's say there are historical sites that date that are Latino and indigenous and that date back, way back to different, the 19th century, early 20th century. And we're in a community where Latino migration it's been here down the earliest arrivals, because a lot of times that has gone without documentation. But let's say a larger part of migration started in the 70s. There were people here, there have always been people here, the border crossed California also. And how do you begin to think about historic preservation in a town, in a city, in an area, rural area, where let's say the first taqueria might have started in the 70s, or like what do you consider, because you have a different view of what's historic. So like if you're looking at, let's say up here in Fort Bragg, we might not have an important building to preserve, but there are traditions and things like that. How do you think about historic preservation with recent waves of immigration, let's say starting in the mid 20th century?
I love that question because it allows for space for us to be able to correct some of these things in real time. At Latinos and Heritage Conservation, we very much appreciate what we call recent history. And so, if there are newer migration patterns like in the 70s and 80s, those are stories that we're also taking in and learning about because that will be a part of that history in that moment for Fort Bragg in the coming years. You know, while it doesn't meet the what we call the 50-year mark in historic preservation, that's okay. We still want to hear about it. You know, if there is a place where, celebran el 16 y no hay un sitio, that's okay, but it's a cultural landscape and it's a place that community feels like this is near and dear to their heart. And so because of that, we want to hear about it. One of the things too that I often look at whenever we're looking at more recent arrivals and the impact that Latinos are having within communities, I also think about businesses. Like we are scrappy and entrepreneurs and know how to like just get our family off the ground. And so I think about that as well, where I think about there's a lot of commercial districts like the taqueria that you talked about, the quinceañera store, like the piñata store, like you see them everywhere. And one of the things that I'm really challenging in historic preservation, and I speak on this nationally, is that we need to be looking at Latino historic commercial corridors or more recent commercial corridors as a form of commercial districts or main streets for economic development. You know, we're providing so much to communities and it is a self-sustained like corridor in urban areas and people shop there, people go there. I was just in the state of Washington, in Walla Walla, Washington, and there was in the old historic commercial district, it was a 20th century buildings that maybe you would think told like a railroad town or agriculture, and that's traditionally the story that we hear. But inside of those buildings, era puro comunidad. There was like tres quinceañera stores there. Yeah, like two wedding stores there. And I kept thinking, quinceañeras are alive and well in the state of Washington, which is beautiful to see. So that's a different way of looking at historic preservation, is that during the pandemic, Latinos, our numbers of entrepreneurs and of new businesses that were registered and that were beginning to rent out a lot of spaces that had been historically empty were from Latinos. And that's an area that I really challenge us all to think about and different ways that we can tell. That said, I will say that one of the easiest ways to tell the history is to do the oral histories like you're talking about, to hear about our experiences, maybe it is recent history, but there was a community leader that was there in Fort Bragg, the original community leader, I am sure, like in Grapevine, that helped these early arrivals come in, that helped with things like immigration, like doctor's appointments, that helped with this is how you register a child in school in the United States, going to the bank, opening up a bank account. There are people that are doing that work we're lucky enough in recent history that they're still alive and we can still capture their story. And so that's why I love this story, because it's something that we can actually document it and be a part of correcting, this wrong.
And also recent history won't always be recent history.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like the 80s doesn't feel so far away for me, but for people that were born in the 90s or 2000s, that is ancient history. Like in our community, and Loreto and I want to capture this is the arrival of Central Americans in the 80s, because that also tells a more global history, or the history of the Americas, what was happening in Central America at the time where a great migration began to happen to the United States. And the other thing that we find is all the regions of Mexico that are represented in one rural community, and how people bring people up here. And Loreto, tell her the story of Taka and, well, Miranda, when you said, where should we look for Latino history?
Yeah, I want to recognize this concept of not being a monolithical history, no? We say Latinos y ahora decimos Latinx for lack of other term that will, involve everybody. Yeah, but when we started our project, Making History, Haciendo Historia, Latinos en Mendocino, which has a podcast called Nuestro Norte, Our North, we asked a group of our community board, okay, we want to tell the story of Latinos in our area. Who's someone we could talk right away? And they sent us to this Japanese restaurant owner, Taka Now. So they were like, oh, you need to talk to Taka. And we found it just fascinating. We met with him. This was our first interview ever. And he told us how actually he moved here with his family to start the sea urchin business in Noyo Harbor. And for lack of workers, he was coming from Los Angeles, from LA. So he went to LA and actually hired buses and hired people. I brought them here to work in the sea urchin industry, which was a huge industry in the 80s and 90s. And he had the connections, to sell the products, and knew the quality and how it needed to be presented for the Japanese market. So the way our stories are ¿cómo se dice? Woven, no?
Interwoven.
Interwoven, how they are connected. It's just amazing. And I really appreciate understanding more this and making this more available for our community, because it really talks about who we are as people here, where it may not, it seems sometimes, you said it at the beginning of our interview, Seila, that it looks sometimes that it's only white men doing everything. And but if you start looking with more, carefully, you start seeing how many people can be there. And I think our latest generations are taking the baton to actually lead us, as you are leading us, into these stories and these spaces where we can claim our stories and make them public. They exist all over our everywhere. You open, we also interview Karen. I won't be able to remember her last name. I apologize. Museo de la Persona, El Museo de la Persona in Brazil. And she was telling us how every person is a museum. So I want to say thank you so much, Seila Mota Casper, for coming today to talk to us. Please, dear audience, find more information about this, about Latinos in Heritage Conservation. You can Google that online. You can listen to this program again by going to our YouTube channel and also at kcyx.org and click the button to listen in Jukebox. The program will be available a couple of weeks there too in that platform, which is so familiar to all of us here locals. We are going to be back with another program for MendoLatino on June 23rd at 9 a.m. here. And please find more information and don't miss out. We will be having an open celebration of this window at the Lurie Spring Museum that we are telling you, most likely on the 22nd of June, but we will let you know in a timely manner. Thank you so much for listening to MendoLatino.
And thank you to
Goodbye,
Latinos
Seila.
Heritage for the great work that you're doing. We're definitely going to have you guys on again to talk more.
Thank you, Eddie, for connecting us to the waves.